Are we living in a simulation? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. Are we living in a simulation? Well, the short answer is I think no, but it's possible. And furthermore, I don't even think that's the most pertinent question when it comes to are we living in a simulation? I think the most pertinent question is, do we have a soul, and do the laws of spiritual physics still apply even if we were to discern that we are living in a simulation? Because even if we were living in a simulation, as long as our soul was still intact and it was just another experience to be had that we could eventually ascend from or matriculate from or exit, then it wouldn't matter, and that would still fit within the subset of universal experiences. Excuse me. But we're coming into a technology age where it's time to, we have to explore the possibility, as many have, that we are in fact living in a simulation. Now, what does that mean for starters? Are we in a simulation? Well, many people posit that we're in some sort of digitally constructed reality uh, ran by a higher intelligence, and much like the movie The Matrix, our minds are captured in it, and the experience that we are currently having is essentially a video game. Now, the proponents of this theory point out that we live in a holographic universe, which means you can take any piece of this reality that we're in and basically fractal into it. You can do the Mandelbrot set and like zoom in as far as you want, and you will have a replication of the universe, which is consistent for holograms. And then you will also, as you zoom further and further into it, you'll see that what many DMT users have found is that it is an interlatticed, intermolecular subatomic structure that just keeps going, and what appears to be normal space turns into inner space, or, you know, subatomic quantum space rather. And when you get into the metaphysical spaces where waves and particles maintain the same, it's a wave and a particle at the same time, you have quantum entanglement, you have superpositioning, so things can be simultaneously in two places at once, and they have seemingly no physics bound their spatial separation. So basically, like, when you get to the quantum level, like time and space are not how we are accustomed to them operating, and all these things that we really only associate with video games and computer simulations become the baseline physics, right? So right off the bat, one can understand that when you penetrate deeper into the reality, it takes on what we would describe as more digital or simulation type baseline or operating physics. So right off the bat, right as you start to penetrate deeper into it, it starts to take on this type of simulated feel to it, as opposed to when you haven't penetrated deeper into it and you're just going around like an animal in the reality, and you're interacting with matter, and you're even unaware that it has a subatomic level, or that it's even constructed of energy of any kind, really. And you go, oh, well, this is all very solid and this feels very real. And then as one starts to penetrate into it, all the physics change, all of the spatial alignments change, and you start to see the pure informations, you start to see sacred geometries and concepts, and you start to see there are matrices in terms of the mathematical formulas, where you have a bracket of, like, the basic matrix is you have a bracket with 9 numbers, almost like a Sudoku, and they're essentially information sets. And so you start to get into levels where the information set starts to become revealed to you, and how physical, what we perceive to be physical, when you get to these levels, you can see that they're representationally these subsets of matrix numbers and values, which I believe correspond to morals and ethics and self choices that we have. When our physical body is the physical representation of these other layers of the reality that reside within us, that we construct and we do have access to through inner journeying and meditating and other means. And that's well documented from people throughout history. And honestly, it's the process of just learning in general. Just being educated gives you the ability to, in a self-aware manner, access these deeper levels of you that are non-physical, or we'll call them less physical, I suppose. And that's where our real value sets are. And so that's where concepts and numbers and all these different things reside. And when you get into those areas, they become unmistakably digital-like, in terms of our modern mind, we would say that. And that's why the sort of simulation idea comes up. And now on top of it, we're working with computers and we're simulating things, and we're creating artificial intelligences and giving them some level of, some people are giving artificial intelligences some level of autonomy, what appears to be autonomy, and to endow them with the ability to start to create and replicate other programming or instructions as well. And so that gives rise to the idea of, well, you're a few degrees of separation away from that, from those autonomous or soon to be autonomous artificial intelligences running off and creating their own simulations. And for all I know, they have somewhere in a lab. So it's not a stretch of the imagination to then say, well, if you take that idea, and then you also take the idea that there's higher intelligence visiting the planet, which there's ample evidence that there are higher intelligences visiting the planet. If you go on YouTube, there's literally hundreds of thousands of videos from across the years, from across the globe, of people independently filming UFOs and things that are piloted by non-humans, and they come from every country, from every socioeconomic level. They're independently verified. Incidents have multiple camera angles. Governments have admitted that off-planet intelligences are here. So it's no stretch to also say, well, if we're being visited by higher intelligences from other planets, it's entirely possible that they have a level of technology that could create a simulation scenario, right? So people that are proponents of the idea that we live in a simulation, you can never really discount it completely, because within the reality that we're in, all of the elements there they're present to be able to do it. Now, it'd be a tremendous undertaking, and there's all sorts of things that would go into actually making it happen and making us live in a simulation. So all that being acknowledged, and also a lot of scientific proof is that, when scientists drill deeper into the reality, they get to these areas that look like exactly like video games. Now, the way the universe is constructed, and the way I see it, is we had the Big Bang, or the initial point of creation, whatever you want to call it, and all of the known creation that we're in expands into the void and creates the space that we live in. And now we're here, and we're all entangled with the initial primal electrostatic force that fuels everything, that pretty much every culture on Earth ever has drilled into, and says, yes, there's this underlying thing below the Maya, below this illusion that we're in, this physical representation of the underlying life force that powers everything and keeps everything going, and essentially creates a space to live in the void. And within that, we have a universe. And in that universe, when it expanded, it created all these celestial bodies called suns, stars. And from those stars energy emanates to planets, and on the planets is where life is, where we found it. And the energy from the sun powers the life on the planet. And we know that there are essentially innumerable amount of stars. There's like an innumerable amount of galaxies, right? And as far as the human brain goes, a galaxy might as well be a universe. It's not, but it might as well be. And then when you get innumerable galaxies, well, now you're playing with infinity. Now, when you have infinite amount of stars inside the void, propagated out, and the idea is that suns or stars are the most capable body of channeling the most optimum amount of energy from this primal layer that all the cultures agree exists, of this electrostatic, primal energy, the pure white light that just is what it is, the great field of consciousness of existence. These suns are the celestial bodies that are most capable of emanating that energy and that consciousness. Because when we study the suns, we can determine that it's not just a matter of plasma being shot out of it. Like, there's clearly intention in it. It's clearly animating things. It's not just physical vibration. There's information packed in there. There's instructions packed in there, which I understand there's no scientific proof as far as I know right now, but it will be discovered. And so in this setup, and this is philosophy, so we're allowed to be theoretical here. So in this setup, where you have all these celestial bodies that are essentially channeling the best they can the primal energy, the primal consciousness of the unified field, essentially, onto these planets where life happens, and we living in this third dimensional version of life. I view all of those suns and stars as the neural pathways of the universe. Like, if all of the space of the universe can be envisioned and all of the stars in it, then what we're really seeing is a brain, the mind of the universe, the mind of God, the brain of it all. And these star points that are sending energies from it into these physical realms are creating a huge brain, essentially. They're creating the equivalent of the neural pathways that happen in here in the physical reality. And in that way, we are living in the dream, because it zaps things down, it zaps the life down, it zaps the info, all the dreams happen, people live it out, and then they die and they go wherever they go. So from that viewpoint, if we're in the mind of the universe, and we are the imagination of the universe, and we're living the dream, then when we become aware and we dig in a little bit past the mile, a little bit past this 3D veil that we're in, of this just like, oh, it's only a physical reality, which it isn't. Everything says it's not, science included. But when we pierce through that just a little bit, with the context that we're in the imaginative mind of the universe dreaming itself, then of course it's going to feel a little bit wonky, like a little bit digital, a little bit like we're in a simulation. Because you start to realize that it has all of the parameters of engineering that you'd expect from a game or a simulation. And it stands to reason that the only reason that we even make simulations or games, and the reason that in the manner in which we do it, where we write the programming, the code, the routines, all the things, is because we're replicating the situation that we're living in, which is that we're living in the mind of the universe, and we're living out the dream, and we're the dreamers in the imagination of the universe, and whatever other functionalities we have in this particular realm. So I can understand why it gets very confusing for people who get deeper into it, whether it's through external scientific means or through internal yogic means, to start to question whether or not we're in a simulation. And on top of the fact that we're human beings, and when you philosophize as a human being, you're doing it from a point of ignorance, because humans don't have an agreed upon origin story. We don't know what our history is. We don't know. We have guesses. Anthropologists have fossilized records of things and whatever, but like we don't know what our actual origin story is. We don't know where all the humans came from. We don't know why a lot of our evolutionary developments aren't necessarily in tune with the planet we're on. There's a whole lot of question marks. We can't even map out human evolution properly. Like we're supposed to be having that organically evolved from primates, and we're supposed to have missing links, which over normal Darwinian evolutionary scales would mean there should be like millions of years worth of missing link fossils somewhere, and there's none. Um, so we don't know. So when we're trying to figure out, are we living in a simulation, on top of the fact that like we don't know where we're from and we don't know how we propagated on this planet, like a lot of things come into question. But we do know, that's why it's helpful, I think, to go to the macro and say, okay, we know what these celestial bodies are. They're life givers, and we know that they sequence realities. That's a fact. We know that without the sun, there's no reality, period. So therefore, we can conclude that the sun is sequencing realities. And we know that there are essentially infinite suns. And we know that they are the highest energy source known to man. So I think it stands much more to reason that people get confused by this question of, are we living in a simulation, with the fact that they're coming into touch with the much more fluid nature of reality, as opposed to basically, I wouldn't say we've been brainwashed to think that reality is a lot more rigid than it is, but maybe it's easier to say that we're coming out of a stage of ignorance. And it's certainly easier and more projectable to have a rigid reality with like very structured rules that don't bend. And so when people penetrate into a much more fluid reality, there's a tendency to try to want to label it at first instead of just write it out. So I think when people are asking if we live in a simulation, and it's because they've penetrated deeply enough to get to these first layers, or even deeper layers, and come to that conclusion. Now, like I said in the beginning, I'm not even sure that's the most pertinent question. I think the real pertinent question is, do I have a soul? Do the laws of spiritual physics still apply? Like, if I do moral things, does my life get better? Can my perspective evolve? Can my situation change? Does my consciousness continue after death in this, whether it's a simulation or real life, doesn't matter. Like, do I have continuity of consciousness regardless? If I am in a simulation and I die, can I then exit the simulation and, either go to the afterlife or be reincarnated somewhere else? I think those are more pertinent questions. Because if you are in a simulation, the next question is, how do you escape it? And if you're not, and you're just in the organic reality and you're diving into the deeper levels that have been well documented by monks and mystics and messiahs and seers and all the psychic peoples and light workers and new agers, all there's tons of people have penetrated into the deeper levels of the reality through the inner journey, and they all report back this same kind of simulation type feel to it. So either way, whether you're in a simulation or you're still in the organic reality, the thing that matters is that you become aware of your soul, you gain control of yourself, and that you still continue your evolution, and that it matters. It's of personal consequence to the individual living their lives, and that way we can have peace of mind. So either way, we're living the life that we want to, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter as long as you have your soul and you're aware of it. Because if you're in the universe and it's infinite, which pretty much everybody agrees it's infinite, then maybe every once in a while you get stuck in a simulation. It doesn't really matter. I don't think that's the case. But if you do, like I said, the next question is, how do you escape it? Or does your evolution matter? Or do you have continuity of consciousness? And I believe that you do in all of them. Because nobody that says that we're in a simulation says that we don't have souls. Nobody that says that we're in a simulation says that the rules of life don't apply. They're just saying that, like, whoever's controlling it is outside of this particular reality, and we're being confined, and our perspective is being controlled. which that seems to happen whether or not you're in a simulation or not. So the real question is, do you have a soul? Did you activate it? And are you evolving with your continuity of consciousness? So, well, I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner. And whether or not we're in a simulation, have fun.